Welcome everybody to this month's episode of Recovery Rockstar. My name is Melinda White. I am a person in long-term recovery. What that means to me is that I have not had to use a mood or a mind-altering substance since December 28th of 2011. Coming up on an anniversary, thank you so much to all the people who believed in me and the people that helped me and that continue to help. It is not my victory. It is definitely a team victory, and I'm so grateful to the people that paved the way for me. So this month, I am super stoked to introduce the guest that I have. I have been working with Dr. Ed Haak now for some months in assisting with a recovery workshop. It's called a Community Addiction Workshop that is going to be starting. We're going live in February of 2020. This workshop is going to go from February to June, and we'll be able to provide more detail on that. I encourage people to go to the website for the information. The website is www.dredhaakworkshops.com. So again, it's www.dredhaakworkshops.com. So don't forget the S at the end of workshop. So we are so excited to be able to put this workshop together. We've got such an amazing community. There's so many people that are asking for more information on what they can do to be part of the solution. So many people that would like to learn more about addiction in itself. And this is going to be a perfect opportunity. I also want to highlight that while there are a number of workshops, people can join or leave at any time. It's not a requirement that somebody has to go every single time. That being said, they'll definitely benefit most if they can make everyone. So I'm super excited about that. But I am going to turn it over to my guest. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've been really excited about this. I think it's going to be, I know, don't be scared. It's going to be a lot of fun. So as you know, I'd like to interview people and just kind of ask them a little bit about what their recovery journey looks like. And if you'd like to start off, just tell me a little bit about Dr. Haak as a young person.
First, I want to thank you for doing this. I appreciate it very much. And not only what you do here, because you're just such a natural at it, but what you're doing on the team for the workshops. I mean, you're just amazing. And it's so wonderful to be able to be with someone that has such a humble but yet energetic approach to recovery. And so thank you very much for that.
Thank you for letting me do stuff I love and giving me more opportunities.
No, it's my pleasure. I guess my journey started when I was probably 16, 17 years old, and pretty innocently, I think me and the buddies would get together, play cards and do whatever, and was drinking wine and Coke and a little whiskey and Coke and beer and just having fun more than anything, I think. And then I went away. I'm from Indiana. We play a lot of basketball in Indiana. Okay. So I was recruited and went up to University of Minnesota Duluth and played on a scholarship. And I came from some pretty low middle class means, and I didn't want my parents to have to pay for my education. So I ended up going to Minnesota, and little did I know that I would play varsity my freshman year. Wow. And it was just all the road trips and all the stuff was happening, and so it became a little much. And then I left Minnesota knowing I wasn't going to play professional ball or whatever, and then I came back to Indiana, which is where I grew up. And all that while I was drinking beer and definitely drinking was on my mind. But when I got to Indiana and I was living in my own apartment, I started to smoke pot pretty regularly and drink beer, and I ended up probably smoking pot for 30 years of my life. And then got into med school, and then that was an interesting twist. Went out to Kansas City for med school, and Kansas City has a lot of restaurants, and it's so what we would do is we would go to the restaurant supply places and we'd get these cases of nitrous oxide canisters. And you'd screw them into the seltzer bottle, and then you'd inhale that, and it would take you on a journey for a minute and a half, and it would come back and land you back down. And needless to say that there were a lot of canisters, empty canisters in the streets around the dorms and stuff. But then after training, I went to Michigan and spent 6-7 years of my life there, which was a great time growing up. But I also tried a lot of different things, tried spent some time with cocaine and mushrooms, and things started to expand. And then I ended up leaving Michigan and then traveling around the country a little bit. But the more I became a physician, the more alcohol seemed to be the major thing. I could keep my whereabouts, I thought, intact. But alcohol was always available.
Right.
You know, it's everywhere. You can buy it in the grocery store. It's at every conference you go to. It's every meeting you go to. So
More socially acceptable too, which makes it easier to.
Yeah, and I just fit in. I wasn't someone different going out and doing cocaine somewhere. I was just doing alcohol, just like you and everybody else out there. You know, so. But then something big happened to me. I was directing the emergency department here at Northwestern. And in about 2010, the hospitalist program at Northwestern ran into trouble. And the company, the national company who was providing the service, couldn't fill the shifts anymore. So it became a major crisis.
Right.
And so Jill Barry Bowen was the administrator, who I have a lot of respect for, and she's just a great lady.
I love her too.
Yeah, she's done some wonderful things for the community. And so we agreed that I would become the new hospitalist director in addition to the emergency department director. And what I realized is I peeled back the onion of the department, and I'm a pretty anally system kind of guy. So
I've been learning. It's been a joy.
I don't know about that. Stay tuned. But I realized that there weren't many systems there, and there was no committee structure to get things done. There was no, and so I almost felt like and then now there was no staff. They had all left.
Right.
And so I was just madly recruiting some residents and I realized looking back, it was just too much for me.
Too much stress.
I was working 12, 14, 16 hours a day.
Yeah.
And I was coming home and drinking, going to sleep, going back to work, 12, 14, 16 hours, coming home, drinking, going to sleep, and did that 7 days a week.
Right.
I got a separation in my marriage, which then took a toll, and now I was living alone with my dog out in the middle of the woods. You know, and isolation is not a great thing either.
Not at all.
So then I knew I needed some time off. So I took a leave of absence and went out to Passages in Ventura, a treatment program. And it was a fantastic program. It was a very alternative type of program. In this particular case, it was not a 12-step based program.
Right.
It was just a lot of alternative. I had a drug and alcohol counselor, psychologist. I had a hypnotherapist. We did a lot of meditation, acupuncture, massage. We did a lot of spiritual training. It was, and I felt fantastic.
Yeah.
And I know I still talk to my wife, now ex-wife, and she was saying, God, you sound so great, you know, you've come so far. And I felt great. And I came home. And one of the basic foundational things that has now entered into me and my programs that I've developed since is I realized that I came back feeling great, but I came back to the same situation that I had left.
Right.
Nothing had really changed in my life. And so, although I felt great coming back to the same environment, I now, within 2-3 months, started drinking again.
Yeah.
And I was off and running again.
Did you not do anything new when you came back as far as kind of like that aftercare or new things to implement moving forward? Or do you think that might be part of why?
No, I think it was definitely part. And I think that's when I went out, and I'll tell you about that in a second if we have time, is that when I went out to Betty Ford, I really had a much more organized game plan when I came back.
Nice.
It was and that is another one of those foundational things.
Right.
It's not only, I think, to help in life, and I know in my own practice, I really, over the years, became less of a doctor, and I became more of a life coach.
Right.
And really to help people put their lives together, to have a foundation to move forward on, to build the second floor and the third floor and put a roof on a foundation. But if that foundation's not there, then it's very difficult to go forward, because at some point the foundation will crumble and then you're right back. And I know from my own patients and in my own life, the dominoes fall very quickly.
Right. And I love that you have that was something we could highlight on this show, because oftentimes I see this regularly with where I work too, that people may go away to a residential program, but they either don't get a solid aftercare or they don't follow it, and it takes no time to be right back to square one. So I try to encourage the family members that it's as important, if not more important, for that aftercare program to be put into place once the person is out of the safe setting of residential. Otherwise, it kind of, I don't want to say it erases, because I don't believe any positive treatment and information gets erased, but it definitely doesn't enhance the work that they did when they were away. So I love that that was highlighted.
Yeah. And looking back, that was just a huge part of it, and still is.
Right.
You know, in my own recovery program right now. So.
Yeah.
So then back in about 2014 or so, my best friend, dog Buddy, and I were living together pretty much alone. And I came home and something was wrong with Buddy. He looked like he was about ready to die. And so I raced him down to Burlington, down to Peak, and they did a fantastic job with Buddy. But they took a look at him, and after an hour or so came out and talked to me and said, well, you know, I think we either need to put Buddy down or we need to take him to surgery and figure out what's going on in his belly. So there I was making this decision to what to do with Buddy.
Right.
And so I elected to have surgery. So he had surgery, he recovered from surgery, thank goodness, and brought Buddy home. And then Buddy started to get ill again, and I knew we were going to have some trouble. And so I took him down to Burlington. And again, they said, well, you know, we can put Buddy down. And I said, no, I'll take him home. And so I had a few drinks in the parking lot of Peak, and I drove him home. And on the way home, I got stopped by the state police and got a DUI.
Yeah. Was that your first?
That was my first and only, knock on paper.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that was another experience, and it just reiterated to me that I needed to get some help.
Yeah.
And something very interesting, and it was very interesting how the next period of my life happened. It's like certain things it was a path that lit up without me even knowing about it. So the next day, on the kitchen floor, Buddy passed on. And so I then took him down to Burlington again. I met with Jill at the hospital and Dr. Sullivan, and I ended up transitioning from that position and knew I needed some time off, and I worked with EAP, Employee Assistance Program, and had a great counselor, and we then rigged it up that I would go out to Palm Desert to a place called Michael's House.
Yeah.
And I went to Michael's house because they took my insurance and I could afford it. And so I went to Michael's house. And then again, by the grace of God, I was at Michael's house, and a doctor named Dr. Harry, who was at Betty Ford Center, he heard that I was at Michael's house and I was from Vermont.
Yeah.
Well, he was also from Vermont and got a DUI and lost his license and went through the whole thing and then ended up being the medical director out at Betty Ford Center.
Wow.
So he then came and said, Ed, listen, my friend, if you don't do this right, this is going to be a big deal for you.
Right.
And so he said, I want you to come over to Betty Ford and get in the professionals program. And so I did. And so I was at Betty Ford for a little over 3 months.
Nice.
And this program was totally different, which is great for me because I had the experience of both kind of
that
the
combination.
spectrum.
Yep.
And Betty Ford was a very 12-step program. I had small group every morning. I had to go to 1 or 2 meetings a day, and then came out with a very structured aftercare, did a 90 and 90, so that was great.
Yeah.
And I've now been sober for 5 years, almost 5 years.
That's so awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
What would you say at this point in your life that you found that you've implemented to be able to continue on your journey in recovery? Any kind of like practices, whether it's readings or meetings or counseling?
Well, I still go to meetings regularly.
Yeah.
I'm in the Vermont Physicians Health Program, the Provider Health Program. So I end up doing, even today, breathalyzer 2 times a day. After the show, I actually have to give a hair sample every quarter. So they monitor me pretty closely. But I'm hoping now that within the next 6 months, I can be like the bird leaving the nest.
Right.
But, that's also a little anxious because I now will be on my own, and that's a responsibility. It's an opportunity, but it's also a responsibility. Right. And so I think, it's very important that we do have structure. And I think one of the things that I have learned, without talking too much here, but one of the things I've learned in the program that I developed within my own patients, I developed what we call the Haak curriculum, which was a series of talks to try to get my patients to understand what was going on in their life, what was going on in their body, what was going on in their brain. Right. Why is it that we just couldn't say no? Was I a bad person, or what was going on here?
Right.
And so I felt committed to try to help my patients, but I think what I also learned is I was also helping myself understand that.
Yeah.
And so I think it helped me really go along on the journey to really trying to understand what was going on within me. What was a disease that was happening to me that I didn't know about, and how would I fight and treat the disease if I knew nothing about it?
Right.
And, I think one of the things that has happened after I then joined Notch after a year of sobriety, I was grateful that they took me in, and I then became the director, and we started Swanton New Day treatment and education program. And so I think that a light bulb went off one day that said, well, if it seemed to help my patients so much, and they seem to enjoy it and look forward to the exercises and things, why is it that we maybe couldn't do that for the community?
Right.
Does the community really understand what addiction is? I'm not convinced of that, because it's taken me a long time, and I'm still learning.
Right.
And I think at no fault of their own, community members are wondering, what's going on, and will somebody please do something? And I think under Governor Shumlin and a lot of people here in Vermont is really looking at being the model for much of the country. Mm-hmm. We've done a lot. But still, I've always felt that each community member may not totally understand the basics, the 101.
Right.
I'm not a wizard. I'm not an expert at anything. Mm-hmm. But I do like bringing some of the medical terminology and the understanding down to where the tire hits the road. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm hoping our team can do as we develop these series of workshops. And so I've taken that same curriculum, and with all of your guys' help, we're going to try to initiate a series of 10 community addiction workshops that start on February 18th.
Thank you so much, because I wanted to highlight the information on when they start. And I love, too, the idea of helping people to understand it better. I have a family member my sister, she's not, one of us, as I like to say. She never had issues with addiction, and also didn't comprehend why people who struggle with addiction do the things that they do. And I remember that there was a young man and it was in the newspaper, it was the middle of the winter, snow on the ground, and he tried to rob a local bank in St. Albans and took off on his bicycle. Of course, he got caught. And her response was, how could he think he's going to get away with it? And my response to her is that he's not thinking about that. More than likely, he's probably thinking, I just assumed die today, so why not try this to not have to deal with how we feel? And of course, that's what I would relay as I was dealing with my addiction. And even today, too, sometimes people will ask, well, why do you still have to go to those meetings? Why do you still do this? Why do you still do that? You're coming up on 8 years. And it's like, because that's what worked. And I don't ever want to go back. And then also the part that you were highlighting, and I love that, is I can't keep what I have without giving it away, without helping others. And I learned a valuable lesson about 1.5 years in, 2 years in, where there was somebody that I was helping in their recovery. And I didn't have the best boundaries. So if they needed me, I would be there no matter what the time of day of the week. I really wanted to be that person that they could rely on. which I've learned since then, okay, well, there's got to be a healthy balance. So I'm not doing the work for people and robbing them of their bottoms. But when this person had relapse, and I was talking to my mom, who also know the person, and she said, you know, it's so sad. You put so much time and effort helping that person. They relapsed. It was all for nothing. And I said, wasn't for nothing, because I'm still sober. And that's the thing, is that I still give and want to help people, but I can't put that expectation on what their outcome is going to be, because that will lead me to a resentment. Like that expectation is a premeditated resentment. But by reinforcing the information of what works, it also holds me accountable, because when you touched on that accountability that's in place, it's going to be gone soon. And there's that mixed emotion of I'm excited for it to be done with, and I'm also a little nervous. And I had that with my fourth DWI, my last DWI, where the probation officer called me in the office and looked me in the eye, and he said, I've got some bad news for you. And of course I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do? You know, because I really felt like I'd done everything I was supposed to. He said, you're not going to get to see me anymore. I'm taking you off probation early. And I said, please don't. Like, I was petrified. He still did, because it wasn't worth the money and the funding that goes into trying to be supervised. And he felt that I was ready to move on, but that's why I got a sponsor. I've got a higher power. I've got a counselor. So how important it is to make sure those other pieces are in place, so there can be kind of that gentle, you know, there isn't as much structure, and yet I freely kind of continue to live within that structure as if it's there. And by sponsoring other people, that keeps me accountable. So when I'm telling somebody, you're burnt out, you're overcommitting, you're doing too much, you're not doing enough self-care, I hear it verbally, and boy, do I feel guilt most of the time, because that's where I struggle. So it kind of makes me, I want to lead by example. I don't want to be a hypocrite and say, you ought to do X, Y, and Z, but I'm home eating bonbons instead of doing my meetings and doing my exercise and my meditation. So I just love how you were highlighting that piece of knowing that by helping others, that reinforces your recovery. And to me, it's one of the most valuable reinforcements that we have that can keep us in recovery for lengths. And
I think so. I think it's I hope, well, I'll see. I mean, I'm a journey in real time, you know, so I think I'll see, but I think I hope, I'm better prepared, understanding a little bit what's going on. And then I think you're right, I've been blessed my whole life by trying to give to the patient or give to whatever, and that's such a rewarding feeling that you can't buy that, you can't do, I mean, you can't get that, they don't put it in a bottle really. But and now this is another chance, an opportunity really for me to give back to community. And that's really why I live in Vermont. I mean, it's the community. I've lived a lot of different places, but never felt as much community. So the opportunity to feel that community also brings some responsibility by each of us community members to do something and give back to it. And this is maybe one of my last projects. But I'm hoping that this works out. And I'm hoping it's valuable. Amazing. It will be valuable for me, even though I'm a bit anxious about the journey. But I think what I'm hoping to realize is the journey really is the destination.
Exactly.
And so I'm plenty open to, again, I have no idea how these workshops are going to be, except I want them to be done professionally and want them to be done well to enable a rich soil for something to develop from that. And that's what I'm hoping that we can do.
Well, it's definitely so far been a joy for me to be part of it, and I'm so excited. And like you said, the journey to me, it's like, you know, there's those evenings I come home a little bit later and my partner's asking, well, how'd it go? How are you doing? Are you getting burnt out? Because it's some longer hours. And it's like, no, this is actually something that fills my spirit. So it's energizing, and that's so exciting and refreshing to be part of something. But that's my language, like my world. The reason that I know that I am alive, because I should be dead, is exactly for this kind of stuff. So why don't you, in the last couple minutes, tell our viewers a little bit about the workshop? What can people expect?
So, you know, these have evolved over time too. But it's a series of 10 community addiction workshops. They'll be held, and I'm very grateful to the Holy Trinity Episcopal Church in Swanton.
Beautiful place.
It's a beautiful place, and it's, you know, close to St. Albans, right in Swanton, and this really is a system I'm trying, with everyone's help, develop really for rural communities. What is it? 30 seconds back in about 2009, I had helped moderate and put on a conference that we held at BFA called the Community Conference on Prescription Drugs. And I kept on asking myself, well, Ed, you want all these people to come and to take part in this, but what is it that you want them to do?
Right.
And I could never for years figure out what is it that you want each individual community member to do about the problem of addiction. Because I would think as a general community member, I'm waiting for someone to help my niece or my husband or whatever. Can you please get this system? And I really think that if we take a little different approach to this, that I think there is something each community member can do.
Yep.
And the first thing of that is to understand what addiction is all about. Right. And then have us come together as a community and use the resource within each one of us to see what we can contribute to fill in this giant community hole called addiction. And I think that if each one of us uses a shovel and puts in 4 or 5 shovel loads of dirt over a period of time with an entire community, we will fill that hole of addiction.
Absolutely.
It doesn't take a front-end loader from the state or the feds to come in and do that. We can do that ourselves. So it's a big goal. It'll be an interesting trial. I've never done this, never seen it done.
Right.
But again, I think the journey is the most important, and I hope the community comes out and thinks about joining us for the journey.
For sure. And we have, we've spoken, there's going to be a Facebook page earlier in the year, right before the workshops start. So that's going to be a place that we can update people with information. We've got the website as well, www.drhaakworkshops.com. No Ed in there. So we're done. And then I know that we're going to be hanging a lot of posters. We're going to be emailing to community partners. We're really going to try to spread the word. And what I love about this is that from the beginning, you've said, whether we have one person show up or 100 people show up, we're going to do this. And we're going to trust that whoever's meant to be there is going to be there at whichever workshop, if not all of them, the appropriate ones where they're going to get the best information and be committed to being part of the solution. I get calls regularly and have for almost 8 years from family members, almost as much as people struggling with addiction. Mm-hmm. Not quite as much, but almost as much.
Well, they're also struggling with the problem of addiction.
Absolutely. So how does a family member recognize that maybe there's codependency in there, which is an addiction to the person? And, so I think that it's going to be so helpful for people to be able to learn what addiction is, how it works, how our brain works, because you and I know that there's a switch that just kind of shuts off if we introduce a substance that shouldn't be there. Yeah. And I define it as a disease of the mind. Addiction, it's not a physical, it's a disease of the mind. That's where, for me, the disease of addiction centers in the mind.
Well, that's exactly
so my
right.
thinking could lead me back into use. It's not really so much the actions as much as working on my mind and my thinking and putting things in place. So if for some reason I'm vulnerable because there's a loss in the family or a job or a spouse, whatever it might be, how can I make sure there's safeguards that I don't pick up again? We've got about 30 seconds and I just want to give you a chance, as I do with everybody, any last kind of phrase or words or anything you'd like to say to our viewers?
No, I think the next step for me, and I hope us, is to just be open-minded and have some initiative to think if you do want to help in the problem in our community, that give us a chance and come out to the workshops and see. And you don't have to attend them all, as you said very well earlier. They'll be online. If you come in after the 4 of our workshops, then you can go online and see the 4 and catch up. And so I think it'll be a very interesting challenge, and it'll be an interesting opportunity for all of us to move forward.
Can't wait. Thank you all so much for watching this episode of Recovery Rockstar. Don't forget to look up the webpage, and we will see you next time.